We all know a Good Samaritan is someone who responds in a moment of danger or crisis, even though it wouldn't technically be their responsibility to do so. But did you know that the phrase Good Samaritan comes from a story that Jesus told? These stories are called parables. Parables are stories with deeper spiritual meaning. And for this one, the context illuminates the content. My name is Jordan Boyce. I'm the pastor of Awakening Church, and today we're going to look at the parable of the Good Samaritan. This story begins with Jesus being challenged by a lawyer. This isn't a lawyer in the modern sense, but a religious one. Think of a scriptural scholar or a theologian. He wants to test Jesus on his view of eternity and how to get there. It's a good question, and it's still hotly debated today. Jesus asks him what is his theology, and he responds by combining two Old Testament scriptures that essentially leads us to say, love the Lord your God with everything that you are, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is a good answer. But the man senses that he has fallen short of this definition of love, so he asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? What he's trying to do is narrow his moral responsibility towards others, much like Cain did when he asked God, am I my brother's keeper? To answer this question, Jesus tells a parable. He says, a man went from Jerusalem to Jericho and he fell among robbers. Now, Jesus was referring to a real road that connected these two ancient cities. This road was built by the Romans, and it was called the Ascent of Adumim, meaning the Red Way. Some people think that it was called that because of the red rocks along the way. Others, like the Crusaders, called it that because of the blood that was spilt there. It's a dangerous road, deep in a valley, surrounded by cliffs and caves. It's narrow and has sharp turns. It's a perfect location for bandits and thieves. When I visited this area, I asked one of the locals if it was still dangerous. At first, he said no, that he camps and hikes there often, but then he paused and he reconsidered it, and he said, but I do bring my dogs. This is tough terrain with a huge drop in elevation. It's difficult, it's treacherous. Jerusalem sits up in the mountains, but Jericho is deep in the valley. It's actually located in the lowest place on earth, way below sea level. And the elevation between these two ancient cities is approximately 3,300 feet, or roughly 3 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. Everyone in the audience hearing this story, they would know this road and the perils of it. Jesus says that the man fell among robbers, is beaten, stripped, robbed, and left for dead on the side of the road, most likely deep in the gorge. Now, by chance, a priest walks by. This would have been a religious leader of the day, a living picture of the law. This priest was most likely returning from serving at the temple in Jerusalem. See, over 12,000 priests lived in Jericho, but they served in Jerusalem, and they would serve for a full month at a time before going home. This most likely is the state of this man returning from serving. Maybe he feels like he's served his time. Maybe when he sees the beaten man, he feels cautious of the danger that this could be a trap. The bandits could still be nearby. And if he did go to the man and touched him and found out that he was dead, now the priest would be ritually unclean. All of these things are going through his mind, so instead of stopping to help, he chooses instead to pass by on the other side. Then a Levi came. He also served at the temple. He would be in charge of the worship, the music, incense, the items needed for sacrifices. Now, he might have even worked the same shift as this priest, maybe even knew him, and was walking home as well. We don't know if he saw the priest pass by before him, but if he did, it would make sense of his reaction. There's a psychological phenomena called the bystander effect, which is seen when there's someone in need and there's a group of people present. Instead of the whole group helping, many times people stand back because the culpability gets spread out. Psychologists call this the diffusion of responsibility. Everyone thinks someone else should help. In one experiment that they ran, they saw a drop of 40% of people offering to help when there was another person present. For that, or some other reason, the religious leader chooses to walk by and he fails his test. But now a Samaritan comes on the scene. This is where the story gets highly controversial to its hearers. The Samaritans were hated by the Jews, and vice versa. They had a long history of violence towards each other. They had different cultures that had developed when Israel was taken into captivity, and the Jews who were left intermingled and married the Assyrians who were brought in to settle that region. They did this in violation of God's law. The Samaritans believed that God should be worshipped on Mount Gerizim, where Joshua made a covenant with God. The Jews believed God should be worshipped in the temple in Jerusalem. This is what the Samaritan woman brought up to Jesus at the well in Sychar. You can watch our video on that. This caused enmity between the two. The Samaritans threw pigs into the Jewish temple as it was being rebuilt, making it unclean. The Jews attacked and burned down the temple of the Samaritans. In fact, when the Jews went to accuse Jesus, they did so by calling him demon-possessed and a Samaritan. You could see the hate. See, deep hurt had developed into deep hostility, and now neighbors had become enemies. And sadly, we still see a lot of this, even in our time, amongst different groups, different people who should be close and yet have allowed hostility to develop. The presence of the Samaritan in this story would have made the original audience think that it's about to go from bad to much worse. But in a shocking twist, this Samaritan, when he sees the man, doesn't cross over to the other side, but is moved by compassion, a phrase that is often associated with Jesus. He goes to him. He binds up his wounds, most likely tearing up his own garments to do so. He pours out oil and wine on him, and then he picks him up and carries him to his own animal and places the broken man on it, effectively exchanging places. Now I ask you, who does this sound like? Who is the one that comes down to us? Who is the one that binds up our broken wounds? Who is the one that exchanges his place with our place? Now the story doesn't end there, but he takes him to an inn. In fact, an ancient inn has been excavated along that road. And he cares for this man all through the night until the morning, when he charges the innkeeper to continue to take care of him, that he might be healed. He gives the innkeeper 2 denarii as prepayment for his care. These 2 denarii would take care of this man for at least 2 more months. And then he makes an extravagant promise. He says, "Whatever you spend, I will repay you when I come back." This is a promise of repayment in return. The early church fathers equated the Good Samaritan to Jesus, the inn to the church, and the promise of return to the second coming. Now, Jesus questions the lawyer. Which of these do you think, he says, proved to be the neighbor to the man? You see what Jesus did there? He turned the question around on him. The lawyer asked, "Who is my neighbor?" But Jesus asked, "Who are you a neighbor to?" Love is justified by its works. Romans 13:8. Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Then he leaves us with the challenge. Jesus says, "You go and do likewise." Jesus was our Good Samaritan. Now our goal is to become like him towards others. If you want to watch the full sermon that this is from, you can click here. Or if you want to learn more about the geography of the Holy Land, click here. God bless.